Hi, I'm Phil Palucha from Billionaires in Boxers, and you are about to engage with Up-Level Your Communication, hosted by Miluna. Wow, this is going to be powerful. Communication is at the heart of everything that is good about business and about sharing with your fellow humans, and Miluna is phenomenal at helping you share that message and also interview some pretty special and amazing guests too. Check it out right now.
Welcome to Up-Level Your Communication. I'm your host, Dr. Miluna Fausch. Listen to the music of your soul. Your voice matters, and on this show, expert guests will talk about the voice and intentional, enlightened communication, because this is how you will influence and impact the world. Welcome to Up-Level Your Communication. I met my guest today at the Goddess Temple of Orange County, California, and she was one of my favorite ritual teachers. She is a true thought leader. A lot of folks call themselves a thought leader, and I hear the same old thing. This is not the case of my guest. She is a true thought leader, a speaker, 7 times published author, an activist, and her work is at the crossroads of spirituality, personal transformation, and social justice. She was named one of the 13th most influential women in goddess spirituality. She is an interfaith minister. Easy for me to say. I think I said that correctly. Who leads sacred tours, public and private, secular and spiritual rituals, and she gives talks to leading organization. Now, Karen is joining us today from the Pacific Northwest with her beloved husband and her 3 feline daughters, probably close by. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Reverend Dr. Karen Tate.
Hi, Miluna. So good to be with you again, like old times.
It's like old times. It's been a long time since we've been together in person.
And quite the journey.
Quite the journey we've both been on. Karen, would you tell us a little bit about your childhood and how that informs what you do today?
Sure. I grew up in New Orleans and lived there till I was 30. I grew up a Catholic, and this is the Bible Belt for maybe some of your listeners that don't immediately connect New Orleans and the southern United States with the Bible Belt, but yep, that's it. And I didn't know anything about the sacred feminine then. I didn't know anything about social justice then. And you know what? Personal transformation wasn't on people's lips either. And, it really taught me how we can live in our own bubbles. And when I lived there, there were not any competing or counter narratives, so to speak. I will be honest and say I grew up not just a Catholic in the Bible Belt, but I also grew up a racist because I didn't know any better. Everybody I knew was one. They would not ever say they were one, but they were. Would hear about the welfare queen in her welfare Cadillac and those sorts of ugly things. And, went to church every Sunday and, didn't realize that disconnect between that, those horrible beliefs and Jesus' teachings, so to speak. This was all just normal. And when I was about 30, my husband and I decided to move to California. We thought it might be, economically advantageous. And we moved to Los Angeles, and it changed my life. Suddenly, I was exposed to so much more spirituality, education, And I cringe at the thought that I would not have made that journey, that I would still be living in that old paradigm. So, yeah, I mean, I probably grew up like most people. Of course, there was family dysfunction, mother complications, that whole thing that needed to be worked out, as we, grew up and gained more awareness and understanding. But that was the fertile ground that, from which I sprung, so to speak.
Wow. Thank you, Karen, for having the courage to reveal that and your beautiful vulnerability. That's not who you are now. That's for sure. Some of us choose to move far away from where we grew up and some of the experiences we had. I can certainly relate to some of that.
Yeah. I think New Orleans probably wasn't quite so conservative and quite so racist as a lot of places in the South. It was more of a melting pot just simply because of the history. But, it was still really prevalent there as well, so.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I have a different view of New Orleans in some cases, but I hear you. I hear you. So it sounds like I was going to ask, when did your path of spirituality begin? Did it take off right when you got to LA? Did it take a while? Tell us about that.
Well, when my husband Roy and I moved to California, we didn't have any friends or family there. We were totally, on our own. So I wanted to find a community, wanted to find, how will my interests be nourished? And I'd always been interested in ancient cultures, and especially Egypt. And I found a class that was being offered online. I'm sure you'll probably remember the old Learning Annex. I don't know if it's still around.
I don't know. Yes, I do. I took many classes with the Learning Annex, both in Hustling and yes.
Yeah, I mean, for your listeners, it was just this private organization that offered, sponsored teachers and inexpensive classes from everything from accounting to yoga. And I took a class about the sacred feminine and goddess. It was curiosity. And, it was interesting. Looking back on it now, I really do think it was a fluff class, but it cracked the door open. And it exposed me to this idea of a feminine face of God, which I had no connection to growing up in the South. Everything was Jesus or Jesus's father. And, Mary played a very insignificant passive role. And so this intrigued me, and so I started to pursue that. And that old saying, I believe, is so true. When the student's ready, the teachers appear. And suddenly I started noticing, at the local library, at bookstores, back then they still put flyers on bulletin boards, right? Yes. I'm dating myself here. This was the late 90s. And, and I would see all of these classes about women's circles and goddess circles. And I started to attend. And lo and behold, an entire new world opened to me and totally changed the trajectory of my life.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. I can remember the first time entering the goddess temple, the first location, the smaller location. And isn't that interesting? Because my husband and I had moved, we were in Burbank, California, moving from the East Coast at that time. And someone told me, I said, what is a goddess temple? Aha, the rest is our herstory, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. I mean, it was an incredibly eye-opening. And I realized the first 30 years of my life living in the South, living in the Bible Belt, living in that narrative I described was so limiting, and honestly, I'll be perfectly frank, it made me a bit angry that there had been so many gatekeepers on my education, so to speak, that I didn't have any exposure to anything outside that bubble. And I'm just thankful that we made that journey, and, because I'm pretty satisfied with how life turned out.
Oh, that's beautiful, Karen. I can so relate to what you're saying. I have still moments of sacred rage around what I was not taught and how I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Still pushing out of that little box I was raised in myself.
Yep.
Wow. Define conscientious leadership to us. I love the word you use. It's one of my favorite words. What is it? What does it encompass? And perhaps why it's different. Well, I know it's different. Why it's different.
Well, to me, conscientious leadership means that you actually do what's best for the common good, for your students, for your employees. It's not about just maybe what's best for you. I've been exposed to people, for instance, who are influencers or teachers, and they, especially in this genre that I'm in with, women's spirituality, women's empowerment, anti-patriarchy, anti-misogyny, and let's be frank, politics, because everything is political. Whether we want to admit it or not, politics affects us from womb to tomb. And people who don't see that, I think, haven't really thought it through yet, or maybe want to wear blinders. And I really do also believe in connecting the dots between our spirituality and our politics. So we're not, so we don't have this cognitive disconnect and say, well, yeah, we're about what Jesus teaches, or we're about goddess values, but then they turn around and choose hate or choose exclusion. So to be conscientious would be to make sure there's no cognitive disconnect, make sure you're really walking your talk, so to speak, and you're treating people the way you would like to be treated. And if you're a leader, you have the courage to lead and say the difficult things that maybe may cost you a book sale or cost you someone not signing up for your conference or your webinar, but you're going to stay true to your truth and what you believe will help the common good, so to speak. It's agape. I believe it's one of the types of love, taking care of the common good.
That's so beautiful. And for our audience, we're going to go a little deeper into this. So stay with us. This so matters to have these kinds of conversations. Karen, why do so many companies think exploiting their workforce is somehow okay?
Well, because their bottom line is greed, right? Maybe that sounds like an offensive or, too much of a generalized statement. But when all you're concerned about is the bottom line, then you start making decisions that are just about the bottom line. You don't care how you get there. And in the process, there's collateral damage. And I think that's it. To me, greed is a disease. And I think it should be considered a mental health disorder, quite frankly.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to speak a little more about that as well. I agree. I see so many companies, I call it profits over people.
Yeah, and it's my husband has this great saying, and I'm sure he didn't originate it, but it's like, when is enough, right? We get to the point where, like these billionaires, they have more money than they could ever spend. Some of them could probably solve world hunger with the money in their bank account, but that's not how they're wired. You know, they don't seem to have wiring to, for altruistic or philanthropic endeavors. To them, it's not about the common good. It's almost as if they have this hole inside of them that they're trying to fill, and they think more money is going to fill that hole. And I don't think it will. I mean, if it hasn't already, I don't think it's going to.
Now let's talk about specifically women for a minute, because that's what you and I are all about, really. The divine feminine, not the male version, the male domination that we see everywhere. At this point in my life, and I'm not 20, I'm not 30, and we'll stop there, I am still asked to speak for free, work for free, act for free, sing for free. Why do we so undervalue the sacred work of a woman? And I'll use my own in my case, as a professional, a coach, an actor. What is up with that?
Conditioning and patriarchy. I know patriarchy is a word that is taboo to some people, but it's a word, especially all of us women need to learn. Like I said, growing up in the South, it was not a word in anyone's vocabulary. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the P's were pulled out of the dictionary, right? But, we are conditioned in this male-dominated world to be of service. And, this goes back to the spirituality. We are told that there's God and there's man. Man dictates God's word as if he's getting these divine transmissions, right? And then everything else on the earth is there in service to God and man. So women have been conditioned to be givers, constantly giving until we can't give anymore. And, we raise our children, we take care of our parents, we're underpaid in the workforce. There's less than 20% of us in government. I think there's less than 10% of us as CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. We have so many patriarchal religions where women can't even be ministers or priests. Women have to literally be ordained in international waters in order to receive an ordination. But that's a whole nother topic. But it goes back to the conditioning. That's what we are, that is the box that they put us in. And it's really convenient for those who benefit from all of our giving. And we internalize that. In a way, it's internalized misogyny. We devalue ourselves. We think that's our job. We want to please. And in the process, I think, oftentimes sell ourselves short. And it's a difficult thing to overcome, because I know I fall prey to it. My entire career, because this message was so important, I felt like, okay, if I don't get paid, the payment is secondary, the message is primary. So for so many years, I delivered the message without payment, and I don't regret it, but it's the system that we're living in, and I think that we have to rethink an awful lot of things in our culture right now. Again, from womb to doom. And this is one of them. Women have to be valued and compensated. And Rianne Eisler talks a lot about that. She's one of my mentors. She talks about caring economics. And I'm a spokesperson for caring economics. And we judge our wealth by GDP, or the gross domestic product. But that's not really a reflection of how everyone in society is doing. That's just a reflection of how corporate America is doing. And that leaves out a whole lot of people, and that's usually women and children.
Wow. Now, you shared with me about the reconciliation of spirituality and politics, and you also mentioned this earlier. And you probably know I'm one of Marianne Williamson's coaches, miracle-minded coaches. She was absolutely amazing. I got to meet her here in Charleston with her newest book. She is one of the best teachers and finest women I've ever met, finest humans. And she teaches and stands on this as well. Joining the two, that there should not be a division in our country and our politics. So let's circle back. You say that greed should be taboo and considered a mental health problem. Would you take that a little deeper for us and pack this a little bit more?
Well, there's different layers and different directions, but let me remind everyone that greed used to be one of the 7 deadly sins. And finally, I think it was in the 80s, greed became good. We even have prosperity gospels, where you have these mega churches online and the pastors have jets and all of this sort of stuff. And, rather than, maybe giving more of their wealth to the common good, they're just acquiring wealth, and they justify it by saying, well, that's a sign that you have God's grace. And if you aren't wealthy, then, you're doing something wrong. You don't have God's grace, because if you were, being righteous out there, you'd be wealthy. We've got our values all messed up. And I think therein lies a part of it, because the messages coming, like those messages coming from the pulpit, it used to be, Jesus's teachings, about the meek will inherit the earth. Rich man, has the eye of the needle saying, that a rich man, won't enter the kingdom of heaven. But that's all been tossed to the wayside. And I feel like, that whole narrative needs a rethink, a reboot, because we end up with everybody being consumers. And I think about the teachings of Erich Fromm. He was a German psychologist who talked about having versus being. And I really related to that, because we're in a having mode. It's what's in our bank account, what's in our portfolio, what's in our wallet, what's in our closet, as opposed to who are we really in the world? What do we represent? How are we in service? What type of human are we? Are we regularly reflecting on our values? I mean, when I started learning about goddess spirituality, it became really relevant to me, because this wasn't just about a deity that resides in the heaven, or it wasn't just a deity that people used to worship, even 50,000 years ago, before a male god, I might add. Got to get that plug in. It was also about goddess as an archetype or role model for women and men, meaning women could expand outside the box of just being a giver, just being a breeder, so to speak. She could be her authentic self, as could men. And also, where it gets into the social justice aspect, it's about the values of the sacred feminine, the values of a feminine face of God that have been marginalized in society, and in the workplace, and in the home, and in the church. And patriarchy has convinced so many people that these values are weak. And they're, in short supply at the center of our culture. Well, to have that to avoid the cognitive disconnect, let's put it that way, I believe you have to look at, okay, so what are the values of goddess spirituality? And am I choosing them as an employer, as a voter, as a, community leader, as a mother? Am I teaching, that to my children? Am I teaching, good values to my son rather than perpetuating patriarchy? Am I teaching my daughter to be empowered and equal? Do I pay women in my staff as much as men? Am I voting for the party more likely to empower me or disempower me? So that's I think the best way. I mean, it's all different ways we can go with it, but those are the layers of this.
Wow. Thank you, Karen. We are at such an important time and at such an important choice point for where we're going. Now, your message for the world is what's old is new again. That's just precious. What's old is new again. New standards that help employees become invested in their jobs, enhancing their performance rather than suffering employer exploitation that can debilitate a workforce. And you revealed that would include the gig economy, AI, lack of job security. I'm going to add a lack of safety sometimes, personal safety.
Yeah.
This all leads to employees who don't do their best. And you say, why should they? Yeah, I left corporate for very strong reasons.
Yeah.
Teach us more about this.
Well, the whole idea of what's old is new again. I mean, I even apply that to goddess spirituality, because that was the oldest religion, from my understanding. And it's been, kicked to the curb thanks to patriarchy, because it benefited male domination. It benefited the male class. And so, women have been suffering the sexism and the misogyny and the discrimination and the marginalization all these years, when we know from history, or we call it herstory, that women used to be leaders, but then they got relegated to the home. And men took over, and women were convinced that men were smarter than them. Men were entitled to lead, and, our job was to just serve them and be in the home. And of course, there's a wide spectrum of that, depending on your home, your upbringing, and all of that. And what's old is new again, I believe, applies to the workforce as well, because it didn't used to be the way it is right now. And for younger people, maybe they don't know that. There was a time that women couldn't even have their own credit. They couldn't buy a house. All of that changed decades ago. But think about it. It was only decades ago that it changed. In fact, women in Turkey, an Islamic country, had the right to vote before American women had the right to vote. And now we have Republicans trying to push the SAVE Act, which will greatly suppress women's vote again. But that's kind of another topic. But what's old is new again in the workforce is when I was coming up in the workforce, people got paid benefits, I was a typist in the typing pool, and I had all the benefits of a manager. And those sorts of things are gone today. People just feel lucky to get a hourly job where they can't even get 40 hours a week because, that would mean their employer would have to pay them benefits. So employers have gotten around paying people any sort of benefits by working them part-time. So we have people having to work several jobs with no benefits anywhere. And that's not doing us any good emotionally as humans, as a workforce. And really, I think if employers cared, if we weren't just tools to, pad the bottom line, they would they would care about it from a moral and maybe even a spiritual point of view, but that doesn't enter the equation, so to speak. So I'm saying, let's think about the way things used to be and go back to that when people had job security. Then people felt like, well, I have an investment in this company. I mean, there's a trend now for a lot of employee-owned companies. And I think whenever we can, we should support employee-owned companies. Because if an employee has a seat at the table, whether it be, they're a part owner or whether because they're a union worker, then it makes a difference. They fight for the rights of the workers because, there's that saying, if you're not at the table when the decisions are being made, you're probably on the menu.
Ooh. This is so important what we're talking about. Yes, I completely agree. I think that's one of the answers. Employee-owned co-ops, things that give, we keep our power. We feel, gosh, they're investing in me. I'm investing in them. Oh my gosh.
And also, I'm sorry. But also too, in the Norwegian countries and Scandinavia, after women have received a free education alongside men, they have equality laws there where corporations have to have women in upper management. And what are we doing here in the United States? The exact opposite, the other spectrum. As Trump puts through these DEI executive orders, which is actually legalized discrimination against women, people of color, disabled, and all of that. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just thought that was so important to show the contrast.
It is a huge contrast, isn't it? And other countries do it much better. My husband, Reto, he's Swiss. Swiss people, regardless, get a great education. It's just across the board. They're a very prosperous country. And as you also said, let's go back to the younger people, younger generations don't know all of this. That is so true. I was mentoring a young woman in Silicon Valley when we lived there, and I shared with her about the constant sexual harassment at my first job. And she could not believe it. I said, this is my lifetime we're speaking about.
Yeah.
Every day I was propositioned by the boss. Now, I didn't give in, and I had to push that away on a daily basis. I didn't really go to the company because I think the leadership would have been no different across the board. Now I would handle it. Oh boy, would I put an end to that immediately. But when you're young and you're naive and it's your job, it's scary.
Yeah.
And, especially women don't know what you and I in this lifetime have tolerated.
Yeah.
And gone through in order to make it better for those next generations.
Well, we go into the workforce so unprepared. Now especially, I don't know how widespread civics or things like that are being taught in school. I mean, I think every high school student should have some, acquaintance with what it's like in the workforce so that they do go into the workforce better educated. But the fact that they don't says to me that that's a strategy. Because if we had a more educated workforce, the kinds of things that you detailed before that list, workforce is unsafe. There's, exploitation as far as pay, as far as benefits, the sexual harassment. We tolerate so much. Number one, because we don't know, we don't have to. It's been so normalized, or we're afraid what'll happen if we don't keep that paycheck coming in. I mean, I endured this personally, and we rationalize these things all sorts of ways, but we are really normalizing our own abuse and exploitation. And I think if we were better educated going in, we would see it coming. We'd see it a mile away, so to speak. And we would know it was wrong. No, you're not going to get me to break the law. No, you're not going to put me in unsafe conditions. Yes, I am in, I should have a performance review. I should maybe get a raise on merit. But right, you talk about going to human resources. So often human resources is there to protect the company, not really protect the employee. And honestly, the rules out there for protecting laws, not just rules, it's very difficult to go into court and fight an employer for intentional infliction of emotional distress or any of these sorts of things, because number one, attorneys want low-hanging fruit. So unless you've documented what happened to you for the last 5 years and you have a lot of money to pay them, they're not going to want to take your case. And then then a judge will say, well, just change jobs. Well, you know what? What if you're 55 and these things are happening to you? Ageism is supposed to be against the law, but it's still covertly used. Just like sexism and racism, in spite of DEI regulations that are now being disappeared, even though there were rules against those discriminations, they were still covertly used. When I started writing my Normalizing Abuse book and I asked people to send me their stories, it was appalling, the employers that would expect people to break labor laws. Because that's against labor laws, not interviewing women for a job that maybe your employer just wants men to fill simply because he's a sexist. I'm not talking about, a job that, maybe you need to be muscular, big, muscular brute of a guy. I'm talking about maybe a coder sitting at a desk, and where it's just mental work, So yeah, we really do have to start thinking about all of this and return fairness and equality in the workforce. And that's how I think we become conscientious workers and conscientious employers.
Let's talk a little bit more about your book, your latest, which is just phenomenal, entitled Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on a pervasive culture of abuse. And you shine a light on that because, as you said earlier, I think a lot of people are in denial, both about patriarchy and what's actually going on. Yep. We just don't want to see it. They don't want to get involved. What we need is engaged citizens who feel some personal power and not just a bunch of wealthy people at the top of the pyramid there. Why did you decide to write about and address the abuse?
Well, because I was seeing the docile acceptance of subjugation and exploitation. And I did it myself. And I thought, if here I am, a social justice activist, I'm a warrioress for women, and if I rationalize it and tolerate it in my own life, and I know about this stuff, right? This, how does someone who hasn't even got a nodding acquaintance about this stuff, how do they even know what's happening to them? It shouldn't be normal, although it's normalized, And that was really what clicked in my head. I thought, if this can happen to me, I got to figure out why. And then I have to go share this information. So I started looking into a lot of different, areas of our life where we normalize abuse. And I start out in the book talking about my own story. I went deeper and, really did some soul searching and shadow work about everything I endured and why I rationalized it. And then I get into the larger world. And I took different aspects of our life, whether it be academia, religion, political parties, the media, family and friends, society and culture, and gave all of these examples of how we're normalizing abuse and exploitation. And I felt like, if we can name it, abuse and exploitation, and change our mindset around it, then we can start to do something about it. And it wasn't like I was, making this clarion call for everyone to turn their life upside down. But the first thing to do is be aware of it, right? And then if you're aware of it, then you can decide if you're going to maybe start planning an exit strategy. Or at least open your eyes to what's going on. And then you decide if, maybe the benefits are worth the abuse. I mean, that's a personal choice we all have to make, right? But at least you're being abused. You're into it with your eyes open.
Yes.
Rather than, if your employer's trying to get you to break the law or do things that are unsafe or all the other things that can happen, you just don't accept that as normal. We've accepted way too much as normal. And I think it's hard for us to really look at because there's so much shame around it.
Ooh. Yes, that's underneath it, isn't it? We have tolerated so much.
Yeah.
As divine sovereign beings, what are we doing? What are we doing? Paint a beautiful picture now for us of what a win-win relationship would look like between the employer and employees. Wow, what could it be?
Well, I first of all, I go back to the Scandinavian countries again so that people understand it is happening in other parts of the world. They don't want us to look over there and see how much better, Scandinavian employees have it. They're considered the happiest people in the world. And compared to the life we live, the statistics show that Americans are the hardest working and the most productive, and we have the least benefit for it.
Yes.
And we need to know that. And so in the Scandinavian countries, they have something called democratic socialism. And that's a big picture idea, but it affects us personally because it means that business works with government together to create win-win situations. The government helps businesses thrive, and in return, those businesses help employees thrive. It's not just what I call corporate welfare, where corporations get the benefit of all of our tax dollars, and we don't even have a decent social safety net. In the Scandinavian countries, they have a strong social safety net. They have free child care. And in every country is a little different, but in general, they have free child care. They have free education. They have free health care. They get maybe 3 or 4 weeks vacation. They work a lot of times 4 days a week. Imagine if we just did that, how different our life would be.
Just that alone.
Just that. If we adopted those ideas. But what happens here? We say, oh, you want to be a greedy taker. When you're just asking that your tax dollars be spent to enhance your life and not some billionaire's life, and maybe take care of that hungry child, because everybody doesn't have bootstraps to pull themselves up from. This erroneous idea of rugged individualism has only made life harder. And it's not that we want to be sucking on the tit, as they say, of government, but if we're going to pay our taxes, it should go to something more than the, military-industrial complex, or Elon Musk, with all his government contracts, or subsidizing oil companies that don't need to be subsidized.
While young, when we see their profits, where's the talk about a huge disconnect? Why are we? Well, we know why, but as Karen and I know, that's a whole nother
show. But it's really a redistribution of our tax dollars. So it also benefits us who earned it, right? And so that we, the quality of our life has to be a consideration. The quality of an employee's life, we are entitled to, just like we're entitled to health care. It's a human right. To dehumanize, devalue, degrade, to marginalize workers is exploitation. And that's what we see more and more and more and more. And it's being normalized. So, what does it look like in a great company? You have benefits. Maybe you can work from home. There's equality, based on merit. It's not, this rollback of DEI is so that white men can continue to have the advantage that they've always had, and that's to imply that white men are better qualified, and they're not necessarily, So I don't know if that answered your question thoroughly enough, but I believe, it really goes back to employees demanding that they have a piece of the pie and a seat at the table so that they have some control over their life, within reason, of course, But right now, in most cases, employees are really just being taken advantage of. They're collateral damage, and and we even hear about being woke. Well, I'm sorry, being woke made it so that you don't have to work 60 hours a week and not get overtime. Being woke means you have maybe the weekend off. Being woke means maybe you do have some semblance of OSHA, safety on the job, So this demonization of woke is crazy because woke has protected our rights. And, there's been this campaign to demonize all the benefits and, that have protected us, because of these regulations for the benefit of employees.
And it's across the board, isn't it, Karen? Even as an actor, the union protected me. And then there was no work as a union actor. So now I'm not in the union anymore. This is not okay.
Yeah. Well, even the all can become corrupt, right? I mean, it all can become corrupt if we allow it to become corrupt. And I was at a talk just the other night. Democracy is a verb. It requires action from us. We cannot just sit back and not expect this creep of corruption and exploitation. And that's what's happened. We've become complacent, and we've normalized the abuse and the exploitation.
Yes. Time to rise up. I envision a different world for us.
So do I. And, people say it's coming. 2030 is supposed to be, things are supposed to look a lot different then. I hope that's true.
Yeah, I'm going to use the word hope too. I'm not convinced. We've been hearing this a long time. More people are awake or conscious. I'm not so sure about that as I travel the world. I hope it's true. I want to believe in love and our possibility, but we're not there yet. We're the long.
And I totally agree with you there. And I think part of it is because we've normalized so much. I think we do have to get angry. I mean, women have been conditioned to not be angry. That's supposed to be a negative emotion according to patriarchy. But, I think if you're not angry, then you're not paying attention. And I run into so many people that say, oh, let's just pray about it. Oh, let's just let go and let God. They are not willing to get their hands dirty and put any effort into making that better world. And I think we have to. We've let things go way too far.
I agree. To be uninvolved will not get us collectively to a better place at all. You have a weekly podcast. Tell us about your podcast, beautifully called Voice of the Sacred Feminine. Tell us more.
Well, I am very proud of it because I believe it was actually the first Sacred Feminine podcast, the original. And it started back in 2009. And I interviewed so many great foremothers and way showers, women and men, under the umbrella of the sacred feminine, whether they be talking about her as a deity, archetype, or ideal. So I've interviewed Vandana Shiva, Noam Chomsky, Starhawk, so many different people, Frank Schaeffer, so many people from so many different walks of life, because this idea of the sacred feminine does, the values, the role model, the deity aspect affects so many aspects of our life once we start to dig into it, So there was so many people to talk to, and I had a show once a week, and I still do. I've refocused it a bit, though. Last year, I started actually sharing my own thought leader wisdom, the bees buzzing in my bonnet, as I like to call it. And so now I talk about these sorts of issues, just, me and my audience, like I'm doing with you here. And I'll tackle things from the spiritual. Like recently I gave a message, I call them messages, sacred messages. It was a sacred travel story about traveling back to New Orleans after 30 years and what I felt like I gleaned from that experience. Or, I'm talking about abuse or women's empowerment or politics. Again, we're still under the sacred feminine umbrella, but it is such a big umbrella. So there's a lot to say.
There's so much to say. Oh my goodness. And Karen, how can folks connect with you to find out about your books, speaking topics, your podcast? How can folks reach out and connect with you?
Sure. Well, my website is my name, Karen Tate. So KarenTate.net is the website. Once you get there, you can learn about the podcast. You can learn about the many interviews I've given. You can contact me. You can find out about my being available to give talks, be hired to consult on sacred tours, lead sacred tours, to do public ritual, all of the services I offer there. And that's the hub, KarenTate.net.
The hub. So to our audience, it's spelled KarenTate, KarenTate.net. It's delicious. There's so much information there. Karen, thank you for going deep and having the courage to have conversations that I want to put out there. I want to have, making a difference, speaking out, speaking up for what's right, what's good, and that all of us can build a better world so that all people thrive.
Absolutely. Agape, the common good.
Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you.
My audience, thank you for being with us today, learning and being inspired and challenged. And stay tuned for the next episode of Uplevel Your Communication. You will say bye for now. Thanks for tuning in to our show. If you'd like to have a conversation about how developing your communication and presence skills will connect you to opportunities, impact, income, and fulfillment, let's talk about your future. Go to milunafausch.com and book a conversation with me. You can also find out more about my Forbes book and our podcast music, Strong Body.
Thank you for enjoying this content by Billionaires in Boxes. If you would like to be a guest or a host, be sure to get in contact with us at billionairesinboxes.com.